Thanks for coming out. My name is Lisa Branner. I am the Public Relations Specialist for the town of Silverton. I'm using a mic tonight because we're actually recording this meeting so that we can go ahead and put it up on the town's website and other places on the internet for folks that weren't able to make tonight's meeting. So we'll have some other folks coming up to speak a little bit. We'll be passing that mic around to them as well. So just bear with us on that process. But welcome, thanks for coming again. We are here tonight to talk about the Silverton Area Trails Plan. There is a sign-up sheet floating around the room. If you have not signed in on that clipboard already, please make sure that you do. We're going to be sending out information throughout this process, and that's how I know who is here and how to get a hold of you in the future and make sure you're in the loop. So please be sure to sign in if you haven't already. So why are we here tonight? Some of you have been here over the last couple months for the Kendall Mountain Visioning sessions. We've been talking about the future of our ski area as well as year-round recreation here at Kendall Mountain. And one of the things that kept bubbling up in those conversations was trails. Folks were really interested in seeing more trails on Kendall as well as elsewhere around town. So obviously it's something the community is very interested in and has identified as a priority. The other thing is that there is a 2004 Silverton Area Trails Plan that it's probably about time to update. It's been over a decade. We'll be talking about that plan a little bit later tonight for those of you that may not be familiar with it. But then the next two bullet points, especially important. The BLM is going to be working on their travel management plan for the area. And the Columbine Ranger District is going to be working on their recreation plan for the Forest Service in that district. So all of these things are dovetailing really nicely. We have an opportunity to work together, figure out a common vision for the community, and have those efforts incorporated into the plans that the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service are working on. So our process, what those of us in Town Hall who have been talking about this envision, and this is subject to change as we go, but right now what we're imagining is session number 1, which is tonight. We're going to be gathering information, and then we're going to look to compile all of that. So we're going to be asking you all in the audience for what you know. What trails do you know that exist? And then we'll take the data that the Forest Service and the BLM already have, compile all of that together. Session number 2, talk about trail building philosophies and identify new alignments and connections, looking at that big picture, all the trails, the inventory of trails for the whole area. Session number 3, present a first draft of the plan and ask the community for feedback and fine-tuning it. And then session number 4, hopefully present a final plan that can go before town and county governments, our elected officials, for their approval and adoption. Again, subject to change. So tonight's goals: information sharing, cataloging existing trails in the area, and we also want to talk about identifying stakeholders. We want to make sure everybody who wants to be involved in this process and has a stake in this process has a voice in it. So we work on that as well. And then before we actually dive in, those of you that have been to other meetings I've facilitated know that I like to lay some ground rules down for civil community dialogue, because sometimes we get really passionate in Silverton. So just to keep us on track, we are going to defer judgment. There are no wrong answers, okay? So everybody can contribute something to this conversation. We're going to have one conversation at a time. We're going to try to keep the community at heart and look to find common ground rather than our differences, right? We're all here because we love Silverton. We're all here because we're passionate about the outdoors and our trails in the area. So let's try to work together on that rather than pull each other apart over these issues, okay? If you have any objections with that, you can leave right now. All right, so I wanted to start off just by talking about why are we even interested in trails. And the reason is outdoor recreation. The outdoor rec industry is a huge economic driver in Colorado as well as nationwide. According to the Outdoor Industry Association, which is a trade group, $373 billion a year is spent in the outdoor recreation industry. That's 2% of the GDP. So nothing to sneeze at. And it's growing at a rate of 3.8% annually. So this is something that as we talk about strategies for economic diversification and economic development here in Silverton, we really cannot ignore this, okay? We already have some great recreation happening. How do we build on that, right? So that's why we're looking at outdoor recreation and trails. The economic benefits in Colorado as compared to the nation. And you'll see there looks like there's a little bit of a discrepancy there in the national figure. It says 887 billion. Just to clarify that for you guys, the previous 373, I think it was, versus this larger number includes recreation that is happening within 50 miles of people's homes. So the other number is further flung. This 887 billion includes stuff closer to home, so day trips, okay? But in Colorado, we're looking at $28 billion in consumer spending annually. You can see the jobs, you can see the wages and salaries. It's definitely, in terms of tax revenue, something we should not be ignoring either. And the Outdoor Industry Association defines the outdoor rec economy as these groups: camping, fishing, hunting, motorcycling, off-roading, snow sports, trail sports, water sports, wheel sports, and wildlife viewing. And they have a great report that's up on their website where this data has been pulled from. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to share the link. We'll be putting a lot of these resources up online for you to reference after the fact. So other benefits, obviously health and exercise, quality of life, improvements to the community, increased property values, tourism. We are very much a tourism economy right now. So jobs and investment and general consumer spending are other things that come along with the development of trails. Some of our challenges, and I'm actually going to pull Lewis into the conversation here for a second. Lewis is our new town manager, and he can speak to some of these challenges.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. It's great. We have a good turnout. It looks like we've got a diverse arrangement of user groups, so thank you for coming out. Trail building is, or at least it can be, very expensive. So one of the things we want to always be cognizant of is that we're looking for quality over quantity. It's not so much drawing lines on a map, is really analyzing how much or how realistic it is to build certain trail projects. So I'd like you to all keep that in the back of your minds as we go through the exercises in the next few visioning sessions. Larger grant trails that require grant funding. Colorado is lucky to have a lot of organizations that fund trail building. We have more than most other states, but it's not unlimited. So match money, local funding is always a challenge, coming up with enough money to match state grants. So again, this speaks to the question of quality over quantity. Some trails can be built using volunteer labor depending on the types of use. Timing is important in the sense that a planned lifespan is generally about 5 to 10 years. The one we have now has gone over that, about 14. And one of the things we'll be looking at are what projects in the older trail plan have actually been accomplished. Accomplishing a major trail project every few years is a great accomplishment. So over a 10-year period, if we can really manage to create 5 or 6 new trail alignments, that's a good achievement. We're going to discuss in a little bit more depth after me some issues about property rights and what that means for the trail building process, and also get into some user conflicts that exist. Not every use is compatible with every other use, so we'll get into some topics of user conflict.
Thank you, Lewis. So our strategy, Lewis mentioned this already, is prioritizing quality over quantity. The other thing is we already have a lot of trails that exist in this county. A lot of them are a little rough. They might need to be buffed out, but we do have an existing trail network. So as much as we can utilize that, the better. And then we're going to also look at focusing on creating connectors between existing trails. So that would be, I think, a relatively inexpensive way to expand access, is just by creating some connections between things that already exist. So at this point, I'd like to invite some of our friends from the BLM, the Forest Service, and then we've got Anthony Edwards here tonight to talk a little bit as well. Elijah, would you like to start?
You said I had an hour? So good afternoon, or good evening. I'm Elijah Waters. I'm the field manager for the Gunnison Field Office at BLM. I've also got Stuart Snyder with me. Stuart, you want to raise your hand? Stuart's my associate field manager. We also have a good, robust, very capable recreation staff, and unfortunately, when the meeting got postponed a week, they had other engagements, and so they couldn't make it. So I did want to talk just a little bit about where this fits in with what the BLM's doing. So the BLM, our process is, this area operates under the Trace Rios Resource Management Plan, which was signed about 2 years ago. And in that Trace Rios Resource Management Plan, it made a lot of the big-scale travel management planning decisions for this area. So particularly what I'm talking about is when you do a resource management plan, you designate areas as either open, closed, or limited. And you make those decisions in that RMP. And in this case, that decision for most of this area that we're talking about that the BLM manages in San Juan County, that decision was made that it would be limited. The areas that are an exception to that are the wilderness or the wilderness study areas. And those, of course, are closed to motorized uses and mechanized uses. So what we're doing is we're doing that implementation level plan, which is where we take the existing roads and trails and we decide what limitations those will have put on them. And those limitations can be many, many different things. Seasonal restrictions, types of vehicle restrictions, single track versus double track, Jeeps, ATVs, weight limits. There's a variety of restrictions that we will be discussing. And so where I see this plan fit into that, I think it's perfect timing. I see that we're going to be at the table during this process. We're going to hear what you have to say. Ideally, what I would like to see is when this process results in the Silverton Master Trails Plan, then that would be the proposed action for BLM. Since this is a step-down plan, we don't have to go through the whole resource management planning process, but we do have to do a simple EA. So we're under no real time restrictions. It's going to be, we want to take as long as it takes to get it right. But what we envision is that the outcome of this will be the proposed action, the proposed travel management plan for the BLM. Now with that, I have to qualify that this process doesn't take the place of our process. We will still have to go out for separate scoping. We'll still have to take comments, from outside groups, some of the national level groups, but we think that we're going to have a good proposed action that's going to have a lot of community support and buy-in, and hopefully it's going to expedite our planning process. Now, I know that there's a lot of people here who are rip-roaring and anxious to build trails, and we're rip-roaring and anxious to authorize you to do that. So I would like, ideally, I would like to be in a position where we're going to have something authorized a year from now, or certainly, a year, not this summer building season, but next summer building season. I think we're on track to make that happen. But a lot of it's just going to be dependent on this process, because we want to use this as our proposed action. And let's see, I think just two closing kind of words of thought on it is, one is, BLM, we're not going to build trails. What we're going to do is we're going to authorize our partner groups to build trails on land that we manage. So what those are going to, whether that's going to be the Silverton Single Track Society, whether that's going to be the city of Silverton, San Juan County, we're going to authorize our partners to work to build trails on land that the BLM manages. Now, we're going to have some input in that. We're going to help seek funding. We're going to help, but we're not going to do all of the lifting on our own. And the final thing is just, I would say, as we go through this, let's think toward the future. Think what's the next big thing. And so I remember, when I was a kid, I had a 3-wheeler with balloon tires, and that was the next best thing, and now I think they're outlawed, and then it was 4-wheelers, and then it was side-by-sides, and so let's think, as we think through this, I know there's a lot of interest in non-motorized systems, but let's think of what that's going to look like. This morning I had breakfast with the director of IMBA, and he said, the e-bike segment is the fastest growing thing in the mountain biking world right now, and it's went from real simple e-bikes with a little bit of pedal assist to now there's like 10 different styles of everything between that classifies as an e-bike. So let's think about what the future looks like as we go through this. So with that, I'll take a couple questions if you want, or pass it on whatever you want.
I think we have time for a few questions. Anyone?
Elijah, you're talking about building trails. One of the questions is that there are trails that are out there right now, and what's the BLM's position if we want to go ahead and improve those trails?
That is a great question. I brought a copy of our travel management planning handbook, and I can leave it with people if they want. So when the decision was made to say that this is limited, that this area is limited, the default position is to adopt in the interim all the existing trails and uses that currently exist. And we have a map. I'm not saying it's complete, but we have what we believe to be that picture. So as part of this process, we're not looking to close anything. Anything that's out there on the landscape now, we're looking to keep those existing uses. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I think there's some question about going on a trail that's on the BLM land and being able to improve it to a certain degree just to make it more functional in the interim.
Yeah.
Is that, do you think, and maybe you don't answer this, and we'll know in a second, right? But is the BLM frowned upon people going out there and fixing a blowout, or?
We'd like to know about it. It would be the same thing. We would work with our partners to do that. We have a very limited road budget, and a lot of the trails that I think you're probably talking about aren't what we would necessarily call system trails. Not saying we won't get to that point, but right now they're maybe not in our existing inventory. But we would work with partner groups to address those issues, and I want to make it clear, we can do that in the interim.
We don't have to wait a year for that.
No, we can start that this summer.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yes.
I have 2 questions. One is, you mentioned system trails. I'm from Uray and deal with the Forest Service office out of Montrose. And to be honest with you, there's been a lot of flack and red tape when it comes to system versus non-system trails in regard to, say, the Hard Rock 100. And that's a trail work that I've overseen for several years now. They refuse absolutely to have any work done whatsoever on anything that's not a quote-unquote system trail. What is okay, that's one observation there. And when it comes to BLM trails, you mentioned system and non-system, I get the impression you're willing to have groups, whatever, do some work on quote-unquote non-system trails. And if so, Well, I said, you'd like to know? Who do you contact? What goes on? I have no idea.
So let me make sure I understand the question. Is the question, who do you contact?
Yeah,
or is
right,
it-
for BLM work.
Yeah,
Part of the Hard Rock course goes through BLM territory.
Sure. So the Hard Rock, let me kind of answer that question in a roundabout way. So the Hard Rock course is not a trail. Parts of it are on trails, parts of it are on roads,
Yes,
but the actual course is not a system trail. Yeah, a lot of that's just overland, right? I mean, I've never ran it.
Well, no, there are parts of it are overland.
Parts of it?
Which all, even the overland section are on what used to be old trails that have long since been forgotten, abandoned, and reclaimed by nature. The
And
reason
so-
I bring this up is, a year ago, I wasn't involved in that particular area. I was working my own stuff on the array side, but we're forbidden, the Hard Rock workers forbidden to do any work in Little Giant Basin, where the road entered and turned into a trail. I believe that's BLM territory, and who forbid the work, I do not know.
Well, so we, just a little bit of history. The Gunnison Field Office has been managing this area for a little over a year now.
Okay.
And I put the recreation staff in the Gunnison Field Office up there with any recreation staff of any BLM office in the country. You know, they're responsive, they're knowledgeable about trails, and, you know, and we respond to those requests. So if I'll give you my card,
Okay.
call me, I'll get you the right
I appreciate
person.
that because
You know, but there is some, you know, there is still some legitimate room for discussion about system trails, and there's a lot of routes that are on the ground that are legal roads maybe, or trails that are rights of way to private property that are not technically system trails or system roads. They're legal routes that maybe have a right of way on them, but they're not in our trails inventory. And so I think a lot of those things are things that we're gonna kind of address in this process. Looking, like Lisa said, looking for connectivity and that kind of thing. But I'll give you a card and you can call me,
I appreciate
and
it.
I'll get you the right person.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more question for Elijah, if anybody has another question.
Under the plan, will additional environmental compliance for stakeholders be streamlined in some way? Will additional compliance be required, like a categorical exclusion or EA for a specific trail project, or will that be covered under the plan?
That's another good question. So the way, I think under the EA that the BLM's gonna do once we get this master trails plan, if we have specifics, you know, really specifics, we'll go ahead and do the NEPA at that time. What I envision, and I've had this conversation with several people in the room, is there's a lot of these trail layouts that might be conceptual, but we don't know the exact layouts yet. So I'm thinking we're gonna kind of draw corridors, and then we'll have to do site-specific NEPA when we have an exact trail layout. So I see both. I see one EA that's gonna cover everything, and then when we get to some of these, because we're not gonna build this out in a year. You know, it's gonna probably take several years, 5 or even 10. And so we'll address those site-specific ones either through a categorical exclusion or possibly a DNA, documentation of NEPA adequacy.
Elijah,
We want to expedite it though.
for the lay folks in the room, can you define the
Sure,
EA?
sorry. So NEPA stands for National Environmental Policy Act. And any action that the federal government undertakes or funds or authorizes has to go through an environmental review. And the primary document for that's an environmental assessment or an EA. And then a categorical exclusion is just a documentation that this action is under a certain threshold of impacts. Thank you. We'll be around if anybody wants to talk one-on-one, we're gonna be around.
All right, so if you have additional questions for Elijah, feel free to catch up with him after the session is over. I would like to invite Matt Janowiak. Am I pronouncing your last name properly, Matt?
It's Genovian.
Janowiak. Pardon me. to speak a little bit about the U.S. Forest Service processes.
Thanks for having me tonight. It's a pleasure being here. It's always nice to be back in Silverton. So I used to be the BLM field manager up here, starting in 2009. I was field manager for about 3 years up here, and then we split. Forest Service BLM split off, so I'm the Columbine District Ranger now, basically managing the Forest Service lands in San Juan County. So what we're doing is we're going to be doing a recreation management plan, a little bit different in scope than what the BLM is planning on doing, but it will dovetail in really nicely with what Silverton is talking about, what BLM is talking about. So part of what we're doing is we're looking at recreation management in the South Mineral Corridor. One of the big drivers there is that we're finding that almost all of the campgrounds in the South Mineral Corridor are well within the 100-year floodplain. And so part of our policy is, as a federal agency, we should not be telling people to camp in the 100-year floodplain. That's kind of dumb, really. So what we're going to be doing is, we've got the 100-year floodplains mapped out, and what we're going to be doing is looking at options for moving those campgrounds to higher ground. As part of that, we're also wanting to address the parking and the use on the Ice Lakes Basin Trail, and then also we're going to be looking at options to add additional trails up there. The Bear Creek Trail is one that comes to mind. That used to actually be a system, that used to be a system trail. And one of the reasons it came off of our system is because it terminated on private land. Now, as a landowner, how would you feel if the federal government authorized the public to come down a trail and it ended at your property line? There was no easement across your property, but the public comes bebopping down all of a sudden, they're at your fence line. Where are they going to go? They're going to trespass on your property. And so again, part of our policy was, if you don't have an easement, you can't have the trail. Well, the owners of the Ranch Placer are offering an easement. And so we're looking at bringing the Bear Creek Trail back in. And again, this goes back.
That was one of the off the circuit trails that, when honestly, we done some work in the past because it had to be done.
Yeah.
It's part of the course, but it's not a system trail, and I got all kinds of red tape, flack, and threats and everything from about it that had to be done.
Correct. The Hard Rock 100 goes through quite a few private parcels. And that, again, that's where we get caught up in it, is we can't really authorize a public trail up to, and basically tell the public it's okay to trespass on private land unless we've got an easement.
The private land was not marked, there was no sign, we had no idea where it was or where it began or anything.
It's Colorado, you have to know where you are. If you're trespassed, it's on you to figure it out. As a hunter, I know that. I have to know if I'm on private or public land. So if the onus is on the individual. But again, back to what we're talking about is we're looking to this effort to look at other trails that we're not aware of, other routes that are going to logically fit into the trail network on forest system lands. And that's where we want to get engaged with the community here. And you know, as far as the campgrounds and everything else go, that's something that we've been working with the county commissions on. We're going to be making a field trip up there as soon as we can and figuring that out, because I think that there's going to be some synergies between the county and the Forest Service as far as getting that project up and running. But as far as trails go, we're all ears. We want to see lines on maps. We want to figure out what uses were out there or are out there currently. And with those uses, if we can bring them into the system as system trails, that will allow us to actually spend federal money on taking care of those trails and building them up to a certain standard as well, signing them, mapping them, things like that. One of the things that we're looking at as an outcome of this effort is we know things are getting busier and busier up there. There's just no question about it. What we'd like to do is we'd like to have the right trail network so that we can disperse the use, so that we can actually have people having a wonderful time out there on their public lands rather than grumbling and complaining about how crowded it is, or that they can't find a parking spot, or they're going uphill and there's 50 people coming downhill on mountain bikes. we need to try and get the right trail network set up so that we can disperse the use and actually maximize people's experience while they're out there on the land. And that's what we're going to be working with you all for. So, questions?
Matt and Elijah, I'm not sure what a system trail is versus a non-system. Can you explain that for us?
It's pretty simple. So a system trail is one that we've officially adopted into our system, and we are allowed to spend taxpayer dollars on to maintain. And a non-system trail, technically speaking, we're not supposed to be spending taxpayer dollars, so I'm not supposed to be spending trail crew time or anything like that on a non-system trail. Yes?
Are those the trails you see on a map that have some type of designated number or something?
So our system trails are shown on our official Forest Service map. So if you go and buy some of the other map series, some of the National Geographic and some of the other maps that are out there, they have a lot of non-system trails on there. But again, a lot of those trails are there because they're well-liked, well-used, and you know, we need to pay attention to those. In fact, when we finished up the Hermosa planning effort, we adopted a number of those trails into our system. Actually, 2 of those, I believe. And they were showing up on a lot of other maps. And we looked at them and said, well, it just makes sense to bring them into our system. Yes?
Does the Forest Service allow third-party maintenance with non-system trails?
No. We're supposed to go through a process to actually adopt it and authorize the maintenance of those trails. And by that I mean, when I say no, I mean working on the tread, moving dirt and building water bars and manipulating what's on the ground. In the cases where an outfitter has a camp and they're going a mile off of a system trail with a pack string, and there's trees across their trail that they need to get to their camp, cutting trees off of those trails, that's allowed. I mean, we're not going to say no to something like that. But if they're swinging a pick, moving dirt, shifting things around on the trail tread, that's where we need to say no to. And there's laws that we have to comply with that force us to say no to stuff like that.
If I could just, oh, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about how things are looking kind of financially and resource-wise for the Combine Ranger District? Because I work with the Trail Ranger District, and they've got a big backlog. So as far as adding new district trails to the system, kind of how does that work as far as the money to maintain the trail time?
There's a backlog of maintenance, there's no question. But we're seeing more and more community groups, community interests to help us take care of that backlog of maintenance. We just signed a volunteer agreement with the Four Corner Food Right Coalition. That's a new up-and-coming volunteer group. I know the Single Track Society's looking at adopting some trails. I think they've already adopted the Rainbow Trail. And then we're also looking at other options for grant money. So working with the National Forest Foundation and Purgatory Ski Area and other private businesses to basically collect donations from customers to go back to trail work. So there's a lot of options out there. In the back again?
I just wanted to see if you could just lay out the Forest Service's policy about where motorized sports are allowed and where they're not.
We go back to our resource management plan, and that's where we've designated where it's suitable and not suitable. And then if we're in a suitable area, then we would look at the appropriate route designation and the appropriate vehicle type. So is it a single track for dirt bikes, or is it full on for OHVs or even Jeep trails? It all just really sort of depends on what that designation was in the plan. And then I'm kind of with Elijah on this one. We need to be talking about e-bikes. Technically speaking, our policy is they're motorized vehicles. To legally take those onto a trail, it has to be designated open to that class of motorized vehicle. So we've got to be talking about that. And that's part of the visioning process, really.
That's our policy as well.
It is, okay.
It's a very recently signed policy.
Yes.
What is the policy on mechanized cross-country
On the San Juan National Forest, if you're not in wilderness or in the Hermosa Special Management Area, cross-country travel on a mountain bike is legal.
I just want to have that clear.
Okay, on the Hermosa Special Management Area, Congress told us designated routes only.
No, yeah, it was like Ice Lakes Basin, Jurnob, these areas off the Colorado Trail.
We really prefer that people mountain bike on trails,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
but it is legal.
I just heard conflicting things from different parties, and I just wanted to have, like,
Sure.
it just laid on the table.
Okay.
That's not, BLM is different.
I understand. That's why I stressed it.
Glad you're here, Elijah. Okay.
Okay, I think we've got one more question for Matt, and then we have to move on.
Actually, that brings up a great point between BLM and U.S. Forest Service. I'm the director of Chamber of Commerce and also manage the Weather Center. So it would be wonderful to collaborate with you gentlemen on some educational material to help people recreate, to know where they're at, what the rules are, and how to be, a clean user in the backcountry, especially if we're going to increase the backcountry use. You and I both know very well Ice Lakes is borderline out of control. And our phone starts ringing off the hook about now if they can access Ice Lakes, and there's not the parking, then there comes the litter, and all the things that humans bring in masses. But is there an opportunity with you guys to collaborate on some educational marketing material to help people have a better experience in the backcountry?
I'm going to speak for both of us, Elijah. Yes, there's definitely an opportunity.
Good.
And we would welcome that, to be honest with you.
And then coinciding with you, Lisa, between the town map and the chamber website, I think that needs to be the focus of our marketing campaign going into the summer.
The last thing our law enforcement folks want to do is be writing tickets. If people, especially when people give you a blank look like, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be here on my ATV, we want to avoid that as much as possible.
Thank you, Matt. All right, next up we have Anthony Edwards. And Anthony, if you want to come on up and bear with me a second while I get your presentation up.
Can you hear me? Maybe I don't need this, right? I just start yelling like I usually do.
Well, we need it for the video.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. All right.
Hang on.
That's not mine. It's been a long day. I got the River of Lost Souls till about 3 in the morning and got up at 5, and somehow this lady ended up on my presentation. You're good.
I thought I could just see. That's where I was. No? I swear it was working earlier. Help yourselves to a cup of coffee.
We're going to take a 3-minute break. Or 4.
If you need to use the restroom.
I'll get it. That's fine. Well, you're going to want to be able to get yours back on too.
Yeah.
No, I think I have. What's that? How big is this side? Is this that slide? Well, I don't even know if that'll work because it's like. Okay. Yeah. I mean, do you think should I press the buttons on this? Sorry. I can go ahead and go if you want. We have oh, that's fine. I should have put it in the bottom. I'm going to try to get another activity. Is there something we can do after this to get it up? Or this one? It's about 90 times better. I'm recording right now. All right. Computer
PowerPoint on, you're not gonna be able to get PowerPoint. That's why I said, could you do something else? All right, we're going to go. My presentation is not going to go up. So I'm going to go ahead and talk. Ding, ding, ding. All right, thank you, everybody. My name is Anthony Edwards. I moved here originally in 1999. I've been in... yeah. One more, and I'm out of here. My presentation that I would have loved to have shown you if it was up there. Where can we go? Who do we ask? What can we do? And those are the questions that we always get around here. Who come to me, I'm an attorney, and the people wondering how they can work on the trails and not get into trouble. And I tell them, just don't tell anybody what you're doing, and it'll be okay, right? But in all seriousness, it is very confusing. We obviously, we had the Forest Service and we've had the BLM talk about their plans, and those are overlaid, and then we have private property. And let me ask a question first of all. I do have a slide. I didn't bring it tonight, but I show often when I'm talking about mining claims. And how many people are familiar how the mining claims sit, how they overlap, and there can be 3 claims over one another, and then there can be private lands in between, and nobody knows who owns what, and you're just trying to get to A to B. And maybe you have to go 3 miles to get to A to B, really, and really you just want to go across. And 90% of the people who own all those claims, we don't even know where they are. And people who think they own the claims sometimes own something 2 miles that way. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here, and it can be really confusing. So this is where can we go? Who do we ask, and what can we do? Is the name of the presentation. The outline I have, I'm going to talk about easements and right-of-ways in a general sense. Then I'm going to discuss briefly, a little bit, I'll take some time on it, this concept of RS-2477 roads. And roads are, and highways in Colorado are, they're not what we consider highways and roads usually when we're talking today. Roads are trails, foot trails, pack trails. Highways are trails, just the simplest of foot trails and pack trails. It started off during Manifest Destiny when people came here originally. And so when I'm talking about roads, I'm not necessarily talking about motorized roads, roads that we drive our cars on every day. Although those are RS-2477 roads too. When we're talking about them here, we're really talking about foot trails, animal trails, bike trails. And they can be all, but what I'm referring to are those.
And then I'm going to talk about the Federal Land Policy Management Act that was passed in 1976. Kind of really was the end of how RS 2477 roads were built before then. And then I'm going to talk about a Colorado revised statute related to right-of-way and easements. So the word right-of-way only describes the right to pass through land owned by someone else for a specific purpose, right? It's not ownership. You have a right-of-way, you don't own anything. It just is a right to pass through land owned by somebody else for a specific purpose. And then there's easement, the right to use land owned by another person, and can come in many different forms. So there's a right-of-way and there are easements. And I want to talk about prescriptive easements. They exist through historic use of at least 18 years in Colorado. Common examples of prescriptive easements in Colorado include utility lines or driveways that cross a neighbor's property. And these easements are not formally recorded a lot of times in prescriptive easements, but they do require adjudication through a court of law for it to be recognized as a prescriptive easement. Then there are implied easements. An implied easement is one which is not expressed in writing by the parties, but can be implied. And the reason I'm bringing up implied easements is because they're referred to in two ways often: easements by way of necessity and easements by way of pre-existing use. And here's the issue. There's a lot of us that would say that look, we need that. We need to go across there, and that's our easement. It's necessity. Really, we're talking about land ownership. So when people talk about easements as a way of necessity or easements by pre-existing use, it really is related to property sold to other property and the relationship between the estates. It's not what we usually think of. Well, we've been using this trail for 50 years, and so we need to keep using it, or we've been using it. So when we're talking about those terms, and it's really semantics, but it's important that a lot of times when we think of it as easement by necessity or easement by pre-existing use, we're not really talking about what some of us want as trails and using trails going through the mountains. So easement by way of necessity under Colorado law, a conveyance of land from one party to another carries with it an implication that the grantor, that'd be intended to convey the grantee all the easements necessary for the grantee's beneficial and reasonable use of the property. Again, we're talking about ownership of land and one piece of property next to another property, and maybe it can keep going on if somebody owned a large piece. And if I sell you the property on the other side, obviously you should be able to get to the other side. I shouldn't be able to hold you hostage and ask you for more money so you can get to the land I just sold you. And then by pre-existing use is by way of necessity. The easement is pre-existing use requires to demonstrate by the grantee that at the time of the conveyance, the grantor owned both the dominant and the other estate. So when we're talking about necessity and pre-existing use, that's not what we're always talking about when we're talking about easements or rights-of-way on the public lands or in between public lands and the other. So we can, but that's not usually what we're talking about. Then there's express easements. An express easement is one created by the written agreement of the parties. For example, maybe my friend Clem back there tells me that I can go hunt in November on Burns Gulch. Now, never mind that Clem doesn't own that land, and now I'm going to get in trouble on there. The point is that you can have an agreement for an easement just on paper by an owner, another owner. It happens here as well. It's not recorded. It can be for a small amount of time or forever, and that's an express easement. You just need to keep where you have the paper. And then there's the prescriptive easements, and we talked a little bit about it, but I want to talk about a prescriptive easement is a right to use another's land which is not inconsistent with the owner's use. Under Colorado law, prescriptive easement is acquired by open and notorious continuous and adverse use of the land for 18 years. So if we're going over private property for 18 years, and there's some elements to that, and I don't want to go into all of that right now. I'm not going to give a full legal opinion on anything right now. I'm happy to talk to different groups later about that. But for 18 years, if you meet those elements, there is an easement. Now, you're going to need to, if it becomes adversarial, it's not really prescriptive easement again until you have a court order, okay? So, anybody have any questions on that? All right. So, RS 2477. And RS stands for Revised Statutes, and in 1866, Congress and Washington said the right-of-way for construction of highways over public lands not reserved for public uses is hereby granted. And that can get really confusing. We're talking about public lands. So here, all the trails that or all the pathways we're making, okay? Because highways, again, or roads are footpaths and whatever we're doing, stagecoach, there's many different ways people were traveling at that time. But from 1866 going forward, the right-of-way for construction of highway over public lands, it's all the BLM and Forest Service. And so why is that important in San Juan County? Because 86% of San Juan County are public lands. So, and a lot of your rate as well, right? So highway is very loosely defined and includes frequently traveled roads, periodically maintained roads, carriageways, bridleways, footpaths, bridges, turnpike roads, railroads, canals, ferries, and navigable rivers. So, and why is that important here? I think everybody knows we have railroads, at least old railroad grades, and those get a little complicated too, but we have those railroads all come into the town. And I can talk about that more later or after, but we have a lot of areas that were developed during that period that would count under the RS 2477. Now, there are some people, maybe in the land agencies, that we might disagree what's RS 2477 and what's not, but it's important for you to understand that prior to 1976, which I'll go into in a minute, the roads that were developed on the public lands, the trails, okay, what we think of the trails, are public. So lands in appropriated public domain and thus existing. So in RS 2477 language, it talks unappropriated public domain and thus existing public rights of way fell under RS 2477. After that date, the land was reserved for the public purposes and there was no automatic grant of right-of-way for any roads that might develop. Now let me explain that. For the San Juan National Forest here, the San Juan National Forest was reserved in 1905. So roads that started after 1905, it becomes more complicated, all right, for RS 2477 purposes. And so the Forest Service, I don't know, Matt, you could probably help me here. Where does is it really Mineral Creek? I just don't know the line. So people understand in San Juan County here, it's really, where does the Forest Service, or Willie, you can help me, I'm sorry, where does Forest Service and the BLM start?
It's just west of town on Mineral Creek, and then basically 550 runs on Forest Service land just north of town. So basically, the Rainbow Route would be on Forest Service, is that right?
In part.
In part, okay. So that's really kind of the interface between the BLM and Forest Service, is that correct? In general, going up this way. And why is that important? Because 1905 on the Forest Service side is your date where the roads or the trails that were created after then. If the Forest Service doesn't recognize them, there's going to be a conflict for this concept of RS 2477. Now, when we go forward, the Federal Land Policy Management Act in 1976 stopped, and anything after 76 that was built on lands that weren't reserved would not be recognized as an RS 2477. But before 1976, the BLM wasn't; those weren't reserved lands. I don't know, Elijah. I don't know if you want to correct me or. So the trails on the BLM lands, which are this side of, in general, of the Forest Service, so the BLM lands, which is all of here, right? For those who are in San Juan County, are really trails that belong to, from my perspective, belong to the people if they were developed before 1976. Okay? So, now, what does that mean? We still have the private property we have private property issues where our trails are going through private property, correct? And so you go and it's hit and miss and hit and miss. But there is a Colorado revised statute that has a Colorado prescriptive right-of-way. And this is really, I think, the most important part of this, because this is where we get really hung up. And I'm sorry I'm reading the law. I know everybody's going to want to go to sleep, but I promise it's going to get better in about 10 minutes, maybe 5. But all the roads over private lands that have been used adversely, without interruption or objection on the part of the owners of such lands for 20 consecutive years, are eligible for Colorado prescriptive right-of-way. So what was being said earlier is that there's a problem, right? There's trails that have been around a long time, and we're hitting this area where we're going over a private piece of property, and then we're back on our trail again. We've done this for 30, 40, 50, 100 years, who knows? And we can't work with the Forest Service of BLM, and I can't speak for them. I don't know if Colorado or if groups work together to, and it doesn't have to be a government either, I don't believe. I can follow back up on that, and we can put that out if anybody has that question. But a right-of-way, this has been used before for bike trails and other types of trails to fill in that gap and make sure that there's a right-of-way connecting the trails, and it's recognized in Colorado under the statutes. If people have been using it for 20 years. Are there some elements to that? Yes. I'm not going to go into it right now. Well, I tell you what, members of the public must have used the road, and remember, road's a trail, under a claim of right and in a manner adverse to the landowner's property interests. So you're crossing over it, and you're doing it, and the public must have used the road without interruption for the 20 years, and the landowner must have actual or implied knowledge of the public's use of the road and made no objection to such use. So, yes, Peter?
Anthony?
Yes.
Do historic tramways fall into the same classification of trails, roads, etc.? That's an interesting question, Peter. If you follow up with me tonight or later this week, I'll go look into it. I think that the area where the tramway goes, if there was people walking in that area too, if it's just aerial, I think it's pretty complicated. But I'm happy to look that up with you in the next week or so. Is that okay? Okay, so what now? It's a really cool imagery behind us. Just imagine, right? So use the tools, the statutes, and the laws, right? So there's the RS 2477, there's what the BLM and Forest Service can recognize, and then there's your state statutes that, if we've been going over a trail for 20 or 30 years, I know a lot of people get issues with private property rights, but 90% or more of the private property owners here are nowhere, we don't even know where they are. I think more importantly, it'd be a shame if we didn't keep trails open in areas where we've been using them all these years, because we were confused. I'll be right with you. I'm sorry. Then the second thing is, when you're working on these trails and wherever you are, gather the information. There's maps at the Historical Society online. There's maps all over. Get the information. Find out the dates. And it gets nuanced depending on whether you're on Forest Service or BLM, and it gets nuanced on what was going on at the time and what happened subsequent to the time. So gather all the information that you can, and then don't ask my parents for permission. Huh? I think too often we get hung up. I've watched it over the years, where I think I'm going on 18 years now here, and I'm feeling older now. But I'm basically, people go and they ask permission. One, they go to one of the agencies and they go to the wrong person. And number two, they ask permission when there's no permission to be asked, whether it be from the agency or from a private property owner who they think they own the land. Just make sure you're not getting hung up when you're wanting to do something on asking the wrong person at the wrong time.
And for that, I thank you for letting me read the law. Stand up, sit down, stand up. What were you going to ask?
Okay, you were talking about public use for 18 or 20 years along a road or trail.
Mm-hmm.
You get a public easement. Okay, what comes to my mind immediately, a few years ago, you may remember this, Tom Chapman, lots of mining claims in Bear Creek, south of Silverton, I'll tell you right.
I know.
And he said, I'm gonna have our guide, you cannot cross my land and everything else, and the Forest Service cringed in fear and closed the trail off. So I got wondered, requiring him to take a 3-mile detour and go up through, Brattlebell Creek. What you're telling me, the way I understand it, is that the Forest Service told them to go to hell, it's public land.
Well,
It's been used for over 100 years. that
Yeah,
trail.
yeah.
I walked on that trail in the beginning of the early 70s.
here's what I tell you. I think that the way that I would have advised you, and I would need many more details before I give you a legal opinion, but would be that you need to go use the Colorado Revised Statutes, and you, instead of using the BL and the Forest Service, you would go to a Colorado state judge and just go and take that statute and say, this area between here was taken by basically adverse possession.
Okay, that's what you're saying. But by the way, for those who don't know, in the end, Tom Chapman was looked at his land as totally useless to him, in the sense that in 1879, the Ouray County Commissioners authorized the building of that trail. The Ouray County Commissioners. Sandoval County did not exist at that time. But today San Miguel County is part of Ouray County, and when that was found out by the minutes by an assistant district attorney from Telluride, the case was closed, period. Tom Chapman lost in a flash.
And that was because it was recorded under a different Colorado law. So, and every one of these subject matters we could talk about for a whole day. And some of us that geek out on that too, but that's a whole nother thing. There are other ways to do this. These are the most common methods used. If you find that the county or somebody else, or not somebody else, if the county or towns have in their record historic that they've declared roads or something was abandoned and went and transferred directly to the county, those are other records that you can use for what you're looking for.
The minutes of the county commissioners, Ouray County Commissioners authorized the road for two trails, specifically because there are all kinds of mining claims in the area. Many of them were patented, and owners were trying to prevent people from crossing the land, so they had to literally step in and provide public access way to Turkey Creek and to Silverton out of what was then Columbia.
And there may be easements in the record on the private property deeds that you don't even have to go there. That's the important thing to do. Sometimes it takes you a while to get to those deeds.
Let's have 2 more quick questions for Anthony, because we do need to keep this moving along.
Okay, Commissioner McKay?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we were talking a minute ago about a Lackawanna trail that crosses right in front of somebody's porch. It's a white house, some of us may know it. But that trail is the oldest trail in San Juan County, like Rick said. I mean, we go back to the 1870s. And the owner objected to that trail, but it went back to the 1870s before there was even a mining claim, definitely before there was ever a house. And the county's position is this is a people's right of way. We will work with you to realign it so that it might better suit your private property needs. But like you said, we didn't need to ask permission to continue to keep that trail open.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you that I don't like to go to specifics, but if it fits into that statute, you don't. I mean, you have to go get a court order, but the statute's plain that if people have been going across a trail for 20 years, and it meets some elements. I mean, I can talk to you more about those elements, and I would need to get some details, but that's the general rule. If the public's been using something for that amount of time. Yes, Matt?
I think that's a really clear
clarification that everybody just has to grasp is that you may have used it for 20, 30 plus years. Without the court order, you still have no right to go build it or, take care of it yet.
Or to go across it.
You need that, you need the judge to rule on that. Then it does become your right. It doesn't necessarily, and again, these easements get wonky too, because sometimes it's just you who get the right. It's not a public easement in some cases.
Yeah.
And then, but the other thing is RS 2477, one of the things that I learned, been involved in that for decades now, a county or a state must assert RS 2477. An individual, private owner, or member of the public cannot come in and assert RS 2477.
Right.
It has to come through the county.
The easement under the state law is an individual can, but that limits who gets the easement. So if the government comes in and does it for the people, then it goes in, it's a more public type easement. And there are nuances to all of this, but that's, and then RS 2477, like Matt said, if you're going to assert that, that has to be the government. And a federal court, you have to take it to federal court. Because it's yeah.
Okay, one more question and then we have to move on.
I could stay around the back too. Go ahead.
Do these laws just apply to the use of and crossing over private property, or do you enforce it or does it also apply to maintenance and building on those trails?
Well, that's a little bit more complicated, kind of what Elijah was saying. I mean, do I think that if you're doing something on the land that's to help you from going off a gully, that, it depends on how much work you're doing on there, but in general, you are supposed to ask the land managers and get permission. I think we all know that sometimes people put a wooden bridge, a log across, or wherever else, but technically you need to go to the land managers. And come see me privately, and I'll tell you.
That's mine, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just trying to make off with my vest there.
Jane was wanting a news.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Anthony, for your time. I'm sorry we couldn't get the presentation up on the screen, but if Anthony's okay with it, we can post that online for folks to look at and peruse at their leisure. So we are going to move along. Next thing we've got coming up, we are going to get a little interactive here so you guys don't fall asleep on us. And I'm aiming to get you all out of here by 8 p.m. So we're going to move at a slightly faster clip from this point forward. What we are going to move into next is actually taking a look at some maps of the area. And hopefully getting some input from you guys about what exists out there currently. So let me get my slideshow back up here again, if it decides to cooperate. Here we go. PowerPoint is fine, PDFs not so much. Okay, so we're going to move into a mapping exercise where we're looking to take things from macro to micro. So right now we're looking at the big picture. What exists? We want to know everything that exists. As Lewis was alluding to earlier, when we actually go to implement a plan, we're going to prioritize and pick some of those. We're not going to try to do everything, but unless we know everything that's out there, we can't really move to that stage. So we're going to catalog what exists. We're going to take 10 minutes rotating around the room. There's 4 stations, so you'll get 10 minutes at each map, and there's markers and sticky notes. There's also copies of the 2004 trail plan at each of those tables. So if you want to peruse that and see what was identified back in the day, you can take a look at that as well. And what we're going to do is actually have folks, let's have you count 1 through 5, starting in the front row. And those 5 people will then, well, let's just do that first and then we'll see how the group divides up.
1, 2,
3,
4,
5, 1,
2,
3,
4,
1,
2,
3,
4,
5, 1, 2, 4,
5,
1,
2,
3, 4, 5,
1.
2, 3, 4.
Mitch, I think you might be side? No? Anybody else in the back? All right, let's have the ones come right up here at the front. This is a map of the whole area. And then we're going to have the twos congregate at this table over here, threes in the back corner, fours in the other back corner, and fives over here in the front. So, number ones, right up here at the very front.
That's incredible.
Number twos over here.
No, this
3, 4, 5.
There's like 2 people that show.
So I'm going to set a timer. You have 10 minutes to take a look at the map, take a look at the trail plan, see if there's anything you recognize.
Just real
This they would call this in-service trail. System. This would be considered, I'm sure, in-system trail. He's looking for social trail.
Do you also want ideas? Just existing right
So just to clarify for everyone, we are looking for you to record all the trails that you know exist, whether they are system trails or not. We're not looking for your vision for the future of what you would like to see. We'll do that in a future session. So just give me what you know exists right now. And you have about another 5.5 minutes, and then we'll have you move to another station. You've got about 3.5 minutes, and then we're going to change stations. All right, you've got about a minute and a half. Go ahead and finish up any last thoughts, and then we're going to change stations.
Well, and that's where this will happen. Yeah, it's a steam.
All right, ladies and gents, go ahead and finish up. We are going to rotate clockwise around the room now. Go ahead and rotate. We're going to have you look at a different map this time. And you guys are looking to mark any trail you can think of that exists, whether it's a systems trail or not. And don't be stressed out if you can't get it all done in the time frame I'm giving you. These maps will be hanging in Town Hall for the next 2 weeks. All right, you've got about 5 minutes. All right, you got about 3 minutes left at your current stations. All right, folks, you've got 30 seconds. Finish up whatever you're working on.
How's your group doing?
Okay, if you haven't already moved to the next station, please do. We are circulating clockwise around the room.
They're paying him, yeah, it's not, you're not getting paid to drive down there. Whereas he should just tell him, like, hey man, I just heard I was Silverton, so I know how to bring material here.
3 minutes, folks, and then we're going to have you move along.
No, I want to be here. This is a good deal.
All right, about a minute left, folks.
That will save a lot of time digitizing.
All right, folks, finish it up and rotate to the next station. We're moving clockwise.
Bella's just moving with your group.
With trails data.
She's been on quite a few.
Although I guess whenever I do it, this way. Again, that's something I like skiing, so winter. There should be a trail.
I was watching Jim Larry earlier. He told me it was just like exactly where we're going.
So, like I was saying, I was trying to remember some that have trails that can get more precise from them. Because, like, we did this mountain route that started at Colorado Trail in Lewis Lake. We followed trails the whole way, but I couldn't quite connect it to my brain. But I know it's in the guide.
Well, if you come across that, these are the trailers come on in the next couple of weeks. And you can come in and find stuff that you're like, I can't quite tell where that was, but now I found that
There's a lot
book
of
or that map. To try to put all of that data together. It's going to be, thank goodness I'm not the person that needs to do that. All right, you've got 4 minutes left at your current station.
At least I have a voice tonight.
So are there 4 different quadrants?
There's 4 quadrants, and then that the one that's on the whiteboard is the whole area. So just for people, like, I think to look at it from an overview perspective, it might help sometimes if you're used to being zoomed in. Cool. Yeah. I mean, we had pretty good turnout for this. This is a good group of people.
I'm so excited to see these people coming up all day.
And Uray, and, you know, just surrounding areas. I mean, we definitely tried to reach out pretty broadly. I'm like, where can I be that I'm not in? Go hide. It's just good community. How much can you learn by watching it? I don't know.
Are you taking these maps down?
Either me or Lewis will. Yeah, one of us will grab those and bring them back to the office.
Yeah, I'm looking at one.
But I'm a total baby. I'm not very good. I can't do really technical stuff at all. Clem, however, like, he comes home bleeding pretty much every time he goes out mountain biking. I'm like, yeah, not so bad. I don't want it that bad. You know, I'm perfectly happy riding mellow trails. I'll hike anything, but I won't mountain bike. 3/4 of the stuff that he would do.
Mountain biking is insane. I don't know who.
I can barely cycle down to the grocery store.
All right, you've got 1 minute. Go ahead and finish up your work at your current station.
It's like when I'm hiking, I don't feel like I'm just going to be a victim of physics. When you're biking, like one little mistake could mean hospitalization.
People that gets in High Country News. We've had a lot of really good press.
She's like the only dog participating in
All right, folks, finish up whatever you're doing and let's have you rotate to the final station. All right, folks, finish it up. You've got about 30 seconds, and then we're going to come back together as one large group.
Okay, I'll let John know tomorrow. I know, I figured I could just do it when. Really? For a night like this, it's not. Yep.
All right, make your last marks. And we're going to have you guys come on back to your seats. And we're going to wrap up for the evening. All right, take your seats, please. All right, thank you, everyone. It seems like we got some really good data from you all tonight. We are running a little bit over time, and I don't want to keep you too late, but I did want us to revisit the outdoor rec economy and talk a little bit about the user groups that we have here in Silverton and make sure that we are being inclusive and getting all the stakeholders so that we can invite them to future sessions and make sure they have a chance for feedback as well. So. If you recall, the Outdoor Industry Association defines the outdoor rec economy as camping, fishing, hunting, motorcycling, off-roading, snow sports, trail sports, water sports, wheel sports, and wildlife viewing. So we've had a few meetings leading up to tonight's session to talk about, well, who are the stakeholders that are involved in these different activities in our community? And this is the initial list that we brainstormed. So I want you guys to take a few minutes to take a look at it. I apologize that the type is so small, but there's a lot of them. So take a look, and then we're going to do a little brainstorm list of who might be missing so that we make sure we're covering all our bases. So I'll give you just a minute to read that. And when you're ready, I'm going to start recording additional ideas for anything you would like to add to this list.
Maybe the
Durango Running Club. Okay. Already on there, but we'll give them 2 votes. Who else?
Would any of the river companies, the river rafting companies?
Potentially. So River Outfitters. Silverton Avalanche School is another one I just heard.
Backcountry Horse School?
Is that an actual organization name?
It is.
Backcountry Horsemen?
Your list is kind of specific, listing out Clean Mountain Guides, and then you've got rock pilots, and you've got outfitters in general.
Totally. Those are some of the gaps we're hoping you guys can help fill in for us, because you'll see, I think, hunting groups. But none of us in that brainstorm session knew what our area hunting groups might be. So if you have those pieces of the puzzle, please share them. So you said Backcountry Horsemen, right, Matt? I just heard San Juan Mountain Association.
would access to like the Durango area amateur radio club or other amateur radio clubs that use trails or roads to get up to the theaters or things like that?
Yeah, possibly. So amateur radio clubs?
Durango area, Durango Amateur Radio Club.
Durango Amateur Radio Club.
San Juan Sky Outfitters.
San Juan Sky Outfitters, hang on, Willie, I'll come right to you in a sec. Willie, you had your hand raised? Oh, the railroad, yep. I heard EMS and SAR.
Colorado 14. VOC.
Say that again?
VOC.
VOC.
Volunteer Outdoor Colorado Trails.
Oh, good one, yeah.
That Watson
Southwest Conservation CC.
Ah, too many hands. Backcountry hunters and anglers. Say that again for me, Elijah. Trails Preservation Alliance.
True. And then there's a Jeep club out in Uray. I think it's the Uray Jeep.
Uray Jeep Club, does anybody know? Jeepers Creepers? Is that what they're called, Molly?
Yeah, I think there's a group out of Montclair.
I don't know if they're on there. I'll write them down. CMC.
The nonprofit Stay the Trail.
Stay the Trail, okay.
Because you're intersecting all these different townships, you can include the town of Telluride or town of Uray.
Okay, so neighboring municipalities.
Lake City.
Telluride, Uray, the counties as well.
Lake City.
Over. Adjoining National Forest.
Yeah.
Rio Grande, Gila. You get Trout Unlimited?
Trout Unlimited. I don't think they're up there yet. What else you got? La Plata Open Space Conservancy. Hopefully I can decipher my writing when I bring this back to the office.
We're going to do the Silverton Chamber of Commerce, maybe along the lines of Telluride Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, so neighboring chambers of commerce.
Especially if it's tourism stuff.
Other ideas? Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Thank you, Freddie. What are we missing?
Do you want any national groups?
Yeah, I think national groups. I mean, if they're active in this area,
Or would they be interested in?
potentially.
Grants and things, so National Hiking Society, what's the mountain bike one?
IMBA. I'm not sure if IMBA's on there already. They may not be. So IMBA, and you said National Hiking Society? Anything else you guys can think of? It's a pretty darn good list, I'd say, between that and what we just came up with tonight. Mountaineering clubs, can you think of anyone specific, Molly? I mean, I'll write it down as a generality, and there's some research that can follow. Give me just a sec, Dale. San Juan Mountaineers, is that what you said, Fred? Outward Bound and Knowles. Did you have something else, Dale, or was that?
I don't know, is it Durango Ferry, the senior outdoors?
Seniors outdoors? That makes me think of Great Old Broads for Wilderness, too. So Southwest Colorado Native Plant Society. Did one of you guys have another thought? Anything else, or are we done here for the moment anyway? Because we're not done. Not even close. We're just getting started. Say again? The Audubon Society? Not sure I'm spelling that right, but I'll know what it means. Anything else? Okay, maybe the Colorado branch of the Sierra Club.
Colorado Historical Society.
Historical Society. No more answers from you, Emily. You're done. Southern Ute Tribe. That's a really interesting one. Thank you.
Did you get the San Juan Historical Society?
I don't know if we did. We had Colorado, but I'm not sure if we had our local one. Going once, going twice. Should we call it a night? Great work, everybody. Thank you so much. Before you guys head out, I just want to tell you next steps. We're going to have another visioning session, March 22nd, same time, same place. These maps are going to be in Town Hall for the next 2 weeks. So if you think of something, or you weren't sure tonight exactly where a trail was, but you had something in mind, come see us in Town Hall. You'll have opportunity to put more information on the maps. Tell your friends. And thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.